On Wi-Fi.
You're streaming now.
Do you want me to share my screen on Zoom, or are you going to share the presentation?
What would you prefer?
That you do it, because that way it's all going through you.
If it's been shared, if the presentation's been shared with me, I can take care of it.
It's coming to you. Yeah,
Got it.
it's on there.
Okay.
All right, I'm gonna call the September 12th, 2022 DEI Task Force to order at 7:08 p.m. We are live streaming to YouTube. Thank you, Mr. Parkin. And we'll be in session in the Learning Commons at Joel Barlow High School. Since we have some new members, we're gonna go around really fast. Just say your first name, last name, and your role on the task force. And if you don't mind, Sarah, we can start with you.
Sure. Sarah Lieberger, Region 9 Board of Ed, new member on the task force.
Chris Parkin, the chair of the Reading Board on the task force. Ex-officio.
Chirag Sedana, from Reading Board of Ed.
Jason McKinney, superintendent. Hello, everyone.
Pete Trahan, I'm the school resource officer here at Bill Barber.
Clarissa Carter, parent. Kelly Bussey, teacher at Reading Elementary School.
Elisa Velasquez, grade 2 teacher at Samuel Staples.
Michael Branson, the assistant principal at Samuel Staples.
Devin Weigel, member of the Eastern Board and chair of the Joint Task Force.
Jennifer Neal, a parent from Reading.
Stephanie Kirsten Newball, assistant superintendent ER9. Cheryl Graziano, Region 9 Board of Education and a parent of a Barlow student.
Jeff Parker, Easton Board of Education.
Randy Hicks, Eastern Board of Ed Chair.
Mike D'Agostino, Region 9.
We'll start with public comment. Just a reminder to the public, please state your name, street, and town. Keep comments to 3 minutes or less, and please make sure your comments are relevant to the agenda at hand. Public comment?
And an SB 20 morning board of officer. It's not my. So I submitted good evening, everyone. FOIA on September 2nd to Todd Johnston, Randy Hicks, and Superintendent McKinnon on the diversity, equity, inclusion, and DEI policies for the school year. However, it appears that from the response I got, that on behalf of Eastern Region 9 Board of Ed, I want to let you know we have received your Freedom of Information Act request, and which are asking for DEI goals for the 2022-23 school year, DEI policies, and board approval for the DEI program. These records do not exist, and we are not obligated to create new records or respond or questions or commentary. We have attached the DEI committee charge, which was adopted on July 20th, 2020. So that will be going up to Mr. Hennick at FOIA, because I believe the process is the boards, or boards in this case of education, provide a charge. And then that charge is dealt with by the committee. But we'll get more information. And then just the other piece is that as of October of 2021, I asked for Devin Wibble to submit her resignation to the Eastern Board of Education because of her conflict with being paid by Catapult Learning. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Great, seeing none. Committee member comment?
If we're going this way, no.
Okay. Approval of minutes. So in your packet, you have our minutes from the June 6, 2022 special Eastern Reading and Region 9 Boards of Education DEI Task Force regular meeting. Are there any changes, revisions, or adjustments to the June 6th meeting? No.
You have a change or question slash change on page 1. There's a second to last paragraph. References a quote or comment by Sarah. Asked that I'm unsure or I don't know option to the question about a tax on social media. I think it should, it was intended to mean to say should be added.
Yeah.
Added, right?
Correct, I was gonna.
Sorry, Sarah, I didn't mean to take your call. I just so happen to notice it.
Further revisions or changes? So with that change to the minutes, barring any dissensions, we will accept these minutes and I'll make that. We're going to move into a central office administrator and staff update, starting with Dr. Pearson Uball, and kind of a review of the summer professional development work that the schools and teams are doing.
Thank you. I'm gonna stand, I think the secret part, so it's better to get up and move around a bit. So when we were last together in June, we were talking about the definition of culturally responsive education and really what that's all about, and our great interest for all students, staff, and family members to feel welcome in our schools, to feel safe, and to be included. This summer, we had 2 days with many participants from all 5 schools. Slide. 2 days in August that we spent together with a facilitator from the Great Schools Partnership. And the focus of that work really had to do with the power of relationships to power learning. This was really all about how can we be sure that our students feel connected and therefore are open and available for learning. The book that he used as professional text is called Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. The author is Greta Hammond, and she is considered a very well-known and respected author in this field. So I want to bring us back to the climate goals that we talked about a year ago. About a year ago, when the 3 different boards gathered together in their meetings at the start of the year, we talked about climate goals. And since this work is really so much about creating safe and inclusive climates, I want to bring us back to that goal. We decided that at the end of 3 years, the largest goal would be that students, staff, and families would perceive themselves as members of a welcoming, inclusive, caring community. We know that that's not something that can be measured simply by a survey or by test performance. And so we said generally that was going to be evident in many different ways, but it would include both qualitative as well as quantitative data. More specifically, last year, we looked at how ER9 staff, students, and families would feel valued, feel represented, and would have a voice. How can we be sure that people have a voice in classrooms, in discussions, and also in Board of Ed meetings? We also thought it was important to provide new learning, student workshops, parent workshops that would support welcoming and inclusive communities. So some examples of this included upstander training, particularly at our middle schools, teaching kids how to stand up and speak up when they see something, when they see bullying or unkind behavior, and how to be a good upstander as opposed to a bystander who stands by and watches. Also wanted to focus on anti-bullying, teaching kids how to resist from bullying behaviors, and also teaching staff how to support our multilingual learners. Over the last 10 years, we have seen a great change in the demographics of our school communities, and there are many more families that are entering into our towns learning how to speak English. We want to be sure that those families feel supported, feel welcome in our school communities, and of course that our students are supported appropriately, knowing that we really don't have designated staff members who are ESOL teachers. So the work in August had to do with the importance of engagement in learning. And as I said before, people have to be available in order to learn. So students come into school and they feel uncomfortable, unsafe, or unconnected. they are simply less likely to learn, less likely to achieve at the high levels that we expect in all of our schools. And so we talked about many things across the 2 days, but one of them had to do with culture and the 3 different levels of culture. And I think the iceberg analogy here is really apt. And this is very well known. Anyone could Google it and find many different pictures that show the same thing. But the idea here is that 3 levels of culture begin with the things that might be visible on the surface. One's culture might be seen as traditional foods, flags, festivals, clothing, holidays, et cetera, et cetera. And those are the things that we might, someone says culture, that might be what comes to mind. But there are other levels, and those levels become increasingly guiding in terms of a student's or an adult's experience in our school environment. So then we go to the shallow culture. And you can read this here on your own, but we know that in different cultures, people have different ways of communicating, including verbal and nonverbal behaviors, different beliefs about child rearing, health and wellness and diseases, tempo of work. And so this is where we begin to get at how we need to understand our learners, understand the members of our community, so that we understand, for instance, if I'm having a serious talk with one of my students and that student isn't making eye contact with me, it might be that while it appears to me through my lens that the student is being disrespectful, it could be just the opposite. So it's really important for us to become aware of those things. We can't learn everything for all cultures of the entire world, but we need to have an awareness that those things are important. And then finally, deep culture. This is really where it gets into the core, and the facilitator really talked about this is sort of the emotional gut. And these are the things that really guide people in their decision making. These are the concepts of self, our worldview. It could be spirituality, notions of fairness. But this is what really defines how people operate within their community, whether it's the community of the classroom, the community of the family, or the broader community. And so to be aware that what one holds deep and close to the heart are those things that ultimately will guide their decision-making on a daily basis. And so this awareness experience that the 15 participants had was not so much about you need to teach students these ideas, but as staff members, it was that we need to have an awareness that these are things that are going to guide the learners in our classroom. And so to be aware that not everyone in front of me might have the same cultural experiences that I had in my own life. And they might be, have different traditions, but also be guided by different norms. And some of the examples that we talked about in our group had to do with, sometimes it's a family value. The people will say, in our family, hard work is extremely important. So that comes before anything else. And if that's something that you experience every single day, and so as a student, what you bring into school is going to include that strong belief. It could be a strong religious belief, right? So that's not something that someone checks at the door, right? When they come into the classroom, that's a part of what guides them in their experiences. So this was really fascinating. This was an interesting conversation, both I would say on an academic level, but also just in terms of the participants, some of whom thought that they knew each other pretty well and had an opportunity to share or not share, and could say, you know, gosh, here I thought that we were in a learning community where I knew my colleagues, and yet this was pretty eye-opening. People would share small bits about the things that they held important. So I've already talked about the 3 different ideas here, but you can see some of the different examples here. So why does all this matter? So according to Zoetta Hammond, culturally responsive teaching in the brain illustrates the research showing the deep learning when we can tap into the importance of culture. And then last slide. So this is also important because it has to do with the trust that's so important. So as I said before, this is really all about access to learning, people being open to learn. And when our students come to school, when our staff members come into a professional learning experience, when our families come into our building to participate in meetings, there has to be some sense of trust. There has to be a sense that the relationship and the people involved are here for a common reason, and that's of course, students and learning. But that there's gained trust, and that's what ultimately will guide our work together. So I can say that the 2 days were extremely interesting and productive. And this was one step of many. So this, our consultant that we've hired will continue monthly work with building-based groups of teachers who are, most of whom participated in the work already, so that they have a head start from what they did in August. But certainly others are invited to join as well as support staff members, more administrators. Also meetings with our administrative council. We've spoken before, but it's important for our administrative council to also be aware as we hire people, as we work with families, that these are things we can all benefit from understanding. We also talked about a possible opportunity for this DEI task force. If the task force so wishes, the consultant could come in and perhaps do one of the many activities that he did with the group in August with the task force, so that you would have a sense of experience it as adult learners.
Great. Any questions for Stephanie about?
Yeah, I have a burning question. Any plans to do this type of work with the parent community?
You know, there could be. It's an excellent idea. It's a matter of, and I think it's something that we should talk about as a group rather than having me just give the plan. I think we should talk about sort of steps and having sort of a logical sequence of steps. It's terrific now that we are in person and things feel a little bit more normal. I think one of the hesitations a couple of years ago was that if we were participating virtually, it was hard to build that relationship when you weren't face to face. I think that is certainly something he would be open to doing, and it's a possibility.
And then the second question is, did you survey the staff after the training? Do you know how well it was received, or if staff had any reservations about it, or?
We did. So all of the participants completed a form at the end of the 2 days and provided feedback, but possibly more important, they provided a lot of input as to what they believed were the necessary next steps. The things that, what are the messages that everyone should hear? What are the messages that a certain group would particularly benefit from hearing? And that will be part of our next plan. We'll probably speak next to our administrative council and then get out into the schools.
Staff?
Yes.
Do you have a breakdown of the number of Easton teachers, Reading teachers you're in the Region 9?
I do have it. I don't have it handy, but I have it. We had at least one participant from all 5 schools.
Okay. Well, it wasn't 30 or 40 or 50 people.
15.
Oh, 15. So,
15.
Here's the breakdown. Jeff.
thank you.
And across grades, right? Across grades, right, right. So off the top of my head, I can think that there were 2 people from the high school. We certainly had elementary participants. Think of middle school participants. Yes, all 3 levels.
So can you talk about, you had 15 teachers start this work. Obviously, there's more than 15 teachers across all 5 schools. Like, what is it kind
So
of?
administrators and leaders. So
Yeah.
administrators were invited to participate as well. So
I know you
because our
have a
summer
fully
work
baked
doesn't
plan, but like, yeah.
typically include our support staff, we wanted to be sure that we recognize how important our support staff are, and so they will be part of the next steps.
Great.
There's some work that's possibly a little more relevant for the administrative team versus the teachers.
So the sign up was voluntary, or?
It was, I sent an email out to the entire staff in all 5 buildings, and I actually got many more positive responses at the last minute. You know, people's vacation plans changed. So if you were not able to participate in the last minute, and many more said, I would really like to do this, I just have a conflict with that time.
And there will be more training though coming this school year that folks can take advantage of. So this
Most
is not been.
definitely. It's really a matter of plotting it so that it has sort of a logical sequence rather than having me alone.
Yep. Right. Go ahead.
So.
Yeah.
Again, I think Devin started to ask it, but I didn't really what is the sequence? In other words, so you're teaching, or you're training 15 teachers at this point, that volunteered. What is the plan for how you train everybody?
Right, so,
And is that gonna come, in other words, are the 15 teachers gonna train everybody else? Is there a organized kind of plan as to how each grade level will be trained on different days? Is there gonna be a whole inclusive PD for every teacher in the district? Is there anything that's gonna be written down, that anything that's going to change, anything that we're teaching or how we're doing things? So in other words, I just want to make sure that we're not gonna. I think last year we had a consultant and we got a whole lot of nothing. Just,
I think you're talking about 2 years ago.
okay, 2 years ago, stand corrected, it was still a whole lot of nothing. Just want to make sure that we're on a different path now.
This is completely different work. So this is a different organization and this is different work. So there are maybe some things that include 100% of our staff, support staff, teachers, but more often than not, it's going to be personalized to the needs of the building. And that's why the feedback and the input from the participants in August was important. And that's why the meetings with the administrative team is very important, because each building has its own culture and also staff members that may be in a different place in terms of their strengths and needs. So the teachers and the leaders will plot out next steps in every building. So, you know, by contract, we have a certain number of days with the consultant, certainly. But when the consultant is in one of the 3 districts, the way that they use their time is going to be geared towards the specific needs. So for instance, if there's a school building, and you know, I can think of one that has a lot of new teachers. What are the things that a brand new teacher needs to know when welcoming a classroom of children, right? Which might be very different than the needs of a teacher that not only is a veteran teacher, but has had a lot of experience working with students, say, that speak other languages, that represent different cultures. And so that need is also very different. Teachers will sometimes be put in a position where they are asked if they are willing and interested in being facilitators for some group experiences with the other teachers, but they will not it wasn't an expectation that you signed up to do this work and now you're the turnkey, right? So sometimes we send our content leaders to workshops and it's a cost saving measure, but it also can be really effective in terms of collaboration. So I might send a math specialist to a workshop with the expectation that person becomes more expert on a subject and they come back and train all the teachers. This is probably a mix. So there are some times when the participants will be charged with doing some of that leadership work. It could be in a faculty meeting. But I wouldn't expect someone who went through 2 days to now do mass training. That wouldn't be right for him.
No, I understand. How does this differ though from several years back when we had challenges in math curriculum where we had different buildings doing different things and everyone was just supposed to make it work when they got the bar. So then we went to this whole vertical articulation model where everybody was like from the ground up kind of a thing. Is that kind of what we're doing here? Or is
The
that?
goal is the same. So if you go back to those climate goals, the goal is the same. So because the goal is the same, we're all going to be aimed at the same goal, and the way that we get there might be.
So to make sure I understand what you're saying, you start with a small group of folks who volunteered and many more people were interested, but some people could not make it over the summer, they're on vacation, et cetera. And now based on input, what you've learned, the administrators have learned, you're gonna work with each administration team at the 5 different buildings to really craft a plan that is focused on the needs, the different opportunities, the different strengths in that building. Some trainings could include smaller groups of teachers, some could include the entire building, some could include multiple buildings across the districts. But the point is to all kind of aim towards this 3-year goal, and this kind of more deeper goal. So the training plan may look a little different because the buildings have different needs, cultures, teachers with different tenures, administration. Some, we have 3 or 4 new administrators across the 5 buildings.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about Mike's question. I understand what you're talking about, and I think that part of the role for a number of different leadership groups would be to prevent what you're talking about happening again. right? So we have administrative council. We have both the district climate committee and we have school climate committees. And we have this DEI task force. So we have different check systems so that we are checking in on the progress. And it's not just, we did this one thing and now all 5 buildings go to it and we're gonna hope for the best. Right? It's more organized than that, I would like to believe, certainly.
Thank you.
Can I ask another question? What were some of the mandatory trainings that would help the teachers this summer? Can you just give me one example?
There's nothing mandatory in the summer because I can't compel a
Or-
teacher to
or
be at
teacher
work.
training, any type of teacher training that was done?
In the summer?
No. Do you
And
have
just in
professional
general.
development, just in general?
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
When teachers return, any type of mandatory workshop or training that they were assigned to?
So all of the buildings have welcome back activities and anyone coming into our community, for instance, would understand restorative practice, you know, sort of that's sort of a core experience. And so a staff member coming back, certainly in a new staff member would get professional development on that.
Yeah, I just, I'm feeling a bit disappointed, to be quite honest, because I see this work as, you know, of an emergent nature because of the way things are playing out in our world right now. And I think if we're going to be giving teachers the tools that they need to feel confident that they are addressing, you know, the power of relationships to power of learning, right? I feel that that's something that teachers shouldn't have a choice to attend. I feel it should be on the agenda. Because it's been 3 years now, we've been trying to do this work, and honestly, I don't see us we're making headway, but I think we need to act more emergently.
The question, going forward, the trainings that happen during the school year, like on a professional learning day, for example, when kids are off school, teachers, those are mandatory for teachers to go to.
They are.
Okay.
They are. They're not exactly the same for every teacher, for the reasons that I was sharing earlier. You know, I hear your concern. I guess it makes me question, how would we know that it's not, that the work is not taking hold, or how would we know that it is? And I think this is a question that Chirag has asked at board meetings, right? But how do you measure the success of the work? And professional learning is one of the most difficult things to measure, because certainly student test scores is just one way. You know, that's a very quantitative measure. We know that surveys are not necessarily 100% helpful in that work either. So I think one of our questions should be, how are we going to gather more feedback about progress or lack thereof in different ways, right? So, you know, we talked years ago about how can we gather parents, community members together in a way that they would feel very comfortable sharing their experiences and share feedback. And, you know, for lots of reasons, we know that didn't happen. Maybe that's something that we might explore again.
Yeah, I mean, if you tell me 15 teachers from, you know, the entire district attended this training, I don't know how many teachers there are. You know, what's the total? I don't know.
Around 300.
300, 15 out of 300, that to me sends a message that we're not placing the level of importance on this work that I feel we should, if we're trying to make headway and improve on building solid relationships with, you know, people of different backgrounds and different cultures, and trying to understand on a deeper level, so that everyone will feel connected and everyone will feel accepted and respected. I do think we need to, you know, 15 is not acceptable to me.
So I think the question then becomes, what are the things that we do while everyone's present? Because there are budgetary constraints as well, right? So even funding 15 teachers.
But that's
for 2
my
days
point,
is-
you know, it's like, you know. And what, place on the totem pole this fall. Because, went to the budget issue, which I know I dealt with school budgets a lot. And the things that are important get placed right up at the top of the budget. And the things that are kind of like, maybe nice to have, get placed on the bottom. So I want to push us and I want to challenge us to make sure that we don't view this type of work as a nice to have. There is a lot of work that needs to be done to make sure that we send our kids out into the world feeling with the tools that they need to appreciate and celebrate and respect people of different backgrounds and different cultures. And I see it as emergent work. So that's all I'm going to say.
Thank you.
Sure.
This might be a question for Dr. McKinnon. Is this work part of the strategic plan? I think that might be a nice segue.
It's a nice segue to convocation and strategic planning.
That was our plan. Thank you, thank you, Shar. So the next item on the agenda was convocation and school opening. And convocation, for those of you who don't know, is an opportunity for all the district teachers and staff to come together and be in one place to hear almost a keynote, which is an opening address by the superintendent representing the school leadership at the beginning of the year. Because at the beginning of the year, you have 2 professional development days for Eastern and Reading and 1 day for Region 9. And so really what that means is you have 1 day for all 3 districts at once. There's a lot of things that happen at the beginning of the year where teachers are setting up their rosters, their classrooms, their opening school. And so you have to weigh the message that you provide concerning professional development and strategic planning and goals with a teacher's need to set up the classroom. So convocation is an important time. And so at this year's convocation, let me first say, that was our first convocation in person in ER9 in the last couple of years because of the pandemic. That was my first convocation as superintendent. I hadn't seen it before in ER9. And we brought everyone together. It was nice to have everyone here in the auditorium or just across the hallway. And we announced the Teacher of the Year for each district, which is always very inspiring. We get to congratulate everyone and welcome them back. And we do have a small window of time to talk about what our goals could be and what our strategic priorities are. And one of the things that I emphasized at convocation this year was talking about environment and how our environment matters. So this is one of our slides that I pulled directly from directly during convocation. I talked about culture. And culture is important because it helps build relationships, which lead to a deeper understanding, which leads to acceptance, which leads to greater trust. And we know from research that students learn best when they feel like they are accepted and they can trust their teacher. So we talked about culture, but we didn't just talk about culture in terms of the culture that we're talking about here tonight. We talked about culture in terms of expectations. And over the summer, our administrators read a book called named the Culture Code. And it was basically what successful organizations do and what makes them successful. And so we talked about that successful cultures name their values and they identify what are important to them. And so this was a natural segue into the discussion of developing a strategic plan for our district. But one of the most important things that we do in terms of culture and feedback are these 3 things. And these 3 things here aren't just about culture. These 3 things are how you provide feedback so that students actually accelerate their learning. So there was a study done by Yale, Columbia, well, there's one other university I forget, but there was a set of psychologists that looked at students learning and the impact that feedback has on students learning. And the greatest feedback occurred when the teacher sent this message. And the message is, you are part of the group is special, we have high standards here, and we believe that you can reach those standards. So we talked about this convocation and how don't forget as a teacher to send that message, whether you're talking about math or writing, or whether you're just talking about how you help someone feel in the classroom. That was really important. But getting into strategic priorities are really defined into three buckets. Our values, which come from stakeholders, so you and our audience tonight, but also our climate. Our strategic priorities should be developed from what we consider to be quality instruction, so high impact instructional strategies, what our goals and metrics are, and what our professional development and training looks like, and also what our priorities are. The reason why priorities are important is because they help define how we allocate our resources and where we invest our time and where we invest our money. The difficulty with training all 315 teachers in this culturally responsive training all at once is, of course, we have other priorities that have also been identified by the district in math and science and writing and so on. And so we're also focusing on those priorities. There are also priorities from the state where we have to train teachers in new special education mandates, where we have to train them in bloodborne pathogens, where we have to train them in sexual harassment, we have to train them in bullying and prevention. All of these things are required training. And so it's always very important to balance where do we fit all of these priorities into the limited amount of professional development time that we have. And so that's truly what we try to do. But as we start to develop our priorities, we can start to identify what are the major areas that we need to focus on as a school district. And I can tell you, and Chris, you don't have this slide, but we are going to be talking, we talked about these priorities at convocation, and we plan on previewing them in October at each of the three boards. And priority number one is high quality teaching and learning. Priority number two, developing a culture that promotes a nurturing and welcoming climate, and what that looks like. And included in that bucket is the training and professional development that you talked about as being essential. Priority three is improving our school facilities, making sure that students are safe, that our facilities are sustainable. Priority four is meeting the needs of all learners. So our gifted and talented learners, our learners that require additional support. Priority five is developing a portrait of a graduate that emphasizes real world experiences. And priority six is looking at our staff and our training and whether we're being efficient with our operations and our budget and so on. So we'll talk more about that in October. But I just want to remind everyone, during convocation, we went back and we started talking about some focus group conversations that we had this spring. And the focus group conversations asked two questions. What should the ideal school look like? And what skills and dispositions should our students need when they graduate school? And we collected all of that information. We heard from our stakeholders, and we're starting to put all of that information together. So this is a picture of meeting with our faculty and our community members. And this is a picture of us meeting with our students and asking them those two questions. Out of those two questions, we started to identify some major themes. And those major themes are the items that you see on the board in front of you. We'll talk more about those in October, but they did talk about, they did discuss the learning environment, communication, feeling safe and valued. And it gets into everything that Dr. Pearson-Hugo said, is that culture is not just about that surface level, it's really about connecting with the learner. And a really good teacher connects with the learner. About their interests, about their family, about what they like to do in their free time, and also what their strengths and weaknesses are. That's what really good teachers do. And so these are some of the major themes that started to emerge from the data. Also at convocation, we asked these questions. We were interested to know, are students anxious about coming back to school this year? Because this is a new school year. We know in the past students have been anxious, parents have been anxious about coming back to school. And we can honestly report that students were anxious to come back to school, but we had a really good opening. I'll talk to you about that in a moment. But we asked other questions. My child is overly anxious about returning to school. My child has good coping skills. My child adjusts well to new situations. my child appears tense, my child worries about things they cannot change. Any one of those things may be okay at the beginning of school, but if a student had all 6 of those things, that means that we wanted to make sure our counselors and our school psychologists and our social workers connect with those students. So we shared those data with our counselors, and our teachers and our counselors reached out to those students. And for the most part, we know who these students are already, right? They're on our radar. But these are the types of questions that we need to ask more about, not just about climate in terms of demographics, but about how a student feels and whether they've got the coping skills to be successful in school.
So just a quick comment. So when I think of like equity, right, meeting kids' needs, the questions you're asking, the work that you're doing, the thinking that you're having, our community do, our families do, right? Who knows kids best? You see them every day, your parents, and you have teachers who also see your kids. The idea that, like the idea of equity is not just academic, right? Because we know our kids dealing with challenging trauma, dealing with the challenges of COVID, dealing with other anxieties that may produce itself over the summer. Is like when you come back into school, how can we meet your needs so that you're able to learn? And so I'm really appreciative. I know when I got that as a parent, that quick survey, and then hearing about it in convocation, and then hearing tonight about making sure that when kids come into the buildings, if we know about a need, we are going out of our way across the board to meet that need. That is culturally responsive, and I think extremely important in the day and age that we live now. So I just want to say I appreciate that, because I know it's also, just speaking personally, like I received notes from my kids' teachers on the first week. How is your child doing? How are they feeling? Survey just to fill out about how does my kid learn, and those pieces. That's all about equity and inclusion, right? Making sure that we're meeting our kids' needs, and they're all different and separate. And topics, what are some of their habits, right? So that they can work those things in. And so I just want to say, seeing that as a parent and as board member and on this task force, I really appreciate the work that you guys are doing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So those questions, if you go to the next slide, we looked at the data, and this question here, my child has good coping skills. Well, there was 8% of students, 8% of families that responded that they never have good coping skills. That's really important to know who those students are. Or that 25% of students sometimes have good coping skills. This was a broad enough sample, over 500 students, that you could apply that to kind of the general population. So it's just really good teaching. Whether you call it culturally responsive or whether it's just responsive, it's just good to know about how students are feeling so that they feel valued and connected into the classroom. And then the other item on the agenda was convocation. So convocation, just in summary, I talked a lot there, but convocation, we talked about our environment, how it matters, our strategic priorities, our goals, and our metrics. And in October, at the 3 board meetings, we're going to be talking about how students did on standardized testing. We're going to be talking about our goals and our school improvement plan. And then we'll talk a little bit about our strategic priorities. We're still in the data collection stage. And now it's time to share some broad strategic plans and start identifying goals and action steps. So we're getting close, we're making progress, and that should happen in October. And then just the first couple of days of school, we really did see students coming in much more comfortable than we have in the past couple of years. And I think that's a credit to our staff and to our families and to kind of where we are. And you can, Devin, you can just click through the next couple of slides here. And it just shows some pictures from each of the schools. And there was just a noticeable difference to how the school year started. And that's our update for items 5A and B.
Awesome. I have a question with regard to one of the slides. It's very helpful, and I did follow all the Instagram posts. Very nice. It's great to see everybody smiling and happy. So you mentioned a couple of things, sharing whatever the students' feelings were, right, from the parents and the aggregated data, and that the teachers know who those students are. What does that look like in the high school for potentially, say, this is completely hypothetical, a student who has historically felt marginalized but takes 10 different classes? So what would that look like in terms of creating a better culture for that group of students?
Well, first, we need to know how students are feeling, and if they answered. If they answered in the, well, actually, it was a parent's question.
Okay.
It was a parent that answered that question.
Which sometimes there's a misalignment with the,
Yeah.
with the parents.
So,
Yeah.
getting back to the questions. Overly anxious, coping skills, adjusting well, appears tense, worrying about things they cannot change. All of those things together, we would share those data with the school counselors, and the counselors then reach out to the students. So if you're in fourth grade, you would share that information with the school psychologist, the social worker, and the fourth grade teacher. But to your point, if you're in high school, we're not sharing that data with all teachers. We're really going directly to the counseling department.
So if a child or children need assistance for whatever reason, then it's that, it'll be through that mechanism.
It was just a quick way to take everyone's pulse, at the beginning of the school year. But I think these are the types of questions we need to ask frequently. Because one of the biggest themes, if you go back to the previous slide, one of the themes that emerged from the data was mental health, social emotional learning. You'll see if you tune in October, but I shared the data, and that was really the number 2 theme, or the number 1 or number 2 theme, which meant everyone was really feeling that was an important topic. However, we also were able to sort the data as to whether parents felt that way, whether faculty felt that way, or whether students felt that way. And I don't have that slide. I can't show you that picture right now, but it's a really interesting way, because in some of those themes, like authentic learning, that was a buzzword that the faculty felt really important, right? Our faculty needs to provide authentic learning. Well, students rated that lower at the bottom, right? Because they called it a different thing. They called it they referred to that as learning environment, right? So we were able to sort the data in a certain way to identify who really cares about this. Is this an adult problem, right? Is this what the faculty think they should be focusing on? Or is this really important to students? So coming out of the data will show you what that looks like.
I just wanted to say thank you. I know that from a parent perspective and also a board member perspective, mental health has been a huge concern. So I'm glad that we're hearing all of this feedback and learning from you. And thank you for the convocation. I've heard amazing feedback from everyone across the board that it was great, that they loved it. And I think that it was really important for people to feel like there was a kickoff that was exciting and they were part of something again. And people just really needed that connection. So thank you. And I just wanted to reiterate something back to Stephanie, to your points earlier, because I didn't get to jump in then. I received feedback as a parent that I thought was really striking, because it just really stood out to me. And I didn't realize it at the time that the teachers were doing that PD work. But my kids came home and shared that there were more students who spoke multiple languages than they've ever heard before. And this was just out of the blue and over dinner conversations. And so while you're going through that iceberg talk, it just popped into my memory that, wow, they even mentioned it at home. So I'm so glad that the teachers were able to get that learning, even if it wasn't 15. And yes, I do wish it was more than the 15 teachers. So I agree with you on that, Floriska, but we'll get there. I'm optimistic that we will get there and we will keep making strides and improvements. But I think it's also important for people to know this other feedback that my kids brought home. There are students from Ukraine in our schools right now who are just learning our language as well. So it's not just important for the teachers, it's important for the entire school community, right? And I think that our children are very much aware, I think, especially if they're older, of what has gone on. And so it's impactful for them while they're there to be like, wow, there's kids from Ukraine here in our schools, like my community, it really impacts them too. So they see how the culturally responsive and competent learning, I think, being implemented at their schools, how that is impacting them as well. And then at the high school level, something that I totally forgot about, exchange students, they're back. Forgot about that because it's been a couple years. And so my daughter brought that back home too. We have kids from all these different places. I mean, so I think it just hits on all the various levels. And these are things that, because of the pandemic, we just haven't heard about or, felt the gravity of those things for a little while. So it's nice to see that we're returning back to normal in some of these ways, but that what's happening on the teacher level is going to be impacting the student level, and the students are already feeling it. So thank you.
And just a spoiler alert, English language learner will be one of our priorities. It'll be an action step under a bucket. So it's in the plan.
So I just would love to hear from our amazing faculties, folks who are in the building with kiddos. How did your first, how did you feel welcoming kids back without masks, after a few years of whatever we're in pandemic wise? I don't know what to call it, some post-ish pandemic. How was it for you to be opening?
I thought it was amazing. Just seeing them right from the start. You can tell by the chatter. I've been exhausted, but I think it's just so good because they're really able to just establish those relationships really early on. Whereas I feel like last year it took a little bit of time because we were so separate. So I already noticed it in the culture in the community that we've been building right from the start.
And I would agree. I think it's been busy, it's been happy. And there is a level of intimacy that what has been absent for the past couple of years, and just the ability to be closer to someone physically creates a stronger bond between the students, and that I think is huge for them. That's the biggest change I've seen.
School looks and feels normal.
Any questions for Dr. McKinnon, Dr. Pearson-Uball, or any of our staff members? If you're following along on YouTube or in the crowd, we are on item number 6 on our agenda, committee membership update. I just, again, pulled this right out of the chart. The chart is also included, if you'd like to read the full thing, on the last page of the packet. So just a quick update on where we are with committee membership update. Currently, we are full board members across all 3 boards, Eastern Reading and Region 9. We are quick update on where we are in the students from each middle and high school. So as we agreed during our June meeting, I sent a note through our 2 middle school principals and our high school principal to ask for interest from student representatives from our 2 middle schools, one in Reading and one in Easton, as well as Joe Barlow. And we have multiple people who have expressed interest. And so my plan is this week to send to this task force de-identified information so folks can send me their feedback on the members. If you remember when there was a form for them to fill out. If you're new, if you watched the minutes, you saw the form. If you'd like a copy of the form, I will send it over to you if you have not seen it yet. And that way I can get your feedback on the different student reps who have expressed interest. We do have representatives or folks who are interested from each of the 3 schools. So very excited. We are also now with 1 certified staff member from each school because we have Officer Pete Trahan, who's joined us from Bill Barlow High School. So welcome. And then the place where we Stephanie and I are working now to fill 2 open community member positions, 1 from Reading and 1 from Easton. And so over the next couple of weeks, we will work to send out an email and interest form, and similar to what we're doing with students, I will de-identify that, share that with the task force, and ask for your feedback. So any questions or thoughts about committee membership? So now we're going to move into item 7. We engaged our last meeting, and again, for new members, I hope you had an opportunity to watch the recording of that meeting. where we really talked about purpose and goals of this task force. And so I just wanted to first, before we go into the focus areas that were identified during our last meeting, turn us to the purpose of the task force. We have a lot of new members and some folks joining us in the public. So I put in two different kind of pieces of information in the packet. One at the very end is the charge, the committee charge. This was unanimously approved and adopted in July 2020, just to remind folks of why we are here based on the charge from the 3 districts. And, you know, the goal of this task force, or the charge, is to advise with respect to multiple different areas. We don't have to do all of these areas at the same time, but it's an opportunity for us to, again, dig into information, listen to our leaders, and give advice on a range of topics. And with that, there are 4 different items that the committee is supposed to do. So an annual assessment, regularly scheduled meetings like we have this evening, establish annual multi-year goals, and then around budget and funding. I also included, because I just kind of based on the district's definitions, based on our policy around diversity and equity, I thought it was important just to give folks the opportunity to actually look back at the policy that was passed back in 2019 around, again, all 3 boards unanimously approved, just really what is diversity and equity defined by the policy of our districts. And so we have that just in our minds as we talk about purpose and talk about focus areas for the 2022-2023 school year. Great. So first, and I think this is really to Floriska's comments earlier, an important focus area is professional development for staff and learning opportunities for our task force. So I'd love to engage. And the way I thought maybe this could go is just, we talked about this a lot during our last meeting. I sent out just an interest, kind of what's on your mind, little form, and PD came up from folks. And so when we think about professional development for staff and this task force, because that was something that has come up in maybe every single meeting of this task force, what does success look like? So if we start with staff, we heard about the opportunities that our staff had over the summer. When you think about things that you would like to learn from our administration when we meet again in December, what would be helpful for you to know that we are on track to train our teachers, our staff across our districts and buildings?
Devin, can you repeat that?
I can try. Play it on YouTube. So when I think about PD for staff, we heard the beginnings of a plan or action steps from Dr. Kirsten Ugal. We heard some of the things we're doing over the summer. Just as we think about, you know, a focus area of this task force, what would be helpful when we come back in December to hear from our administration around the plans for PD for staff? And I think I would just think about, I think we often get pigeonholed into what diversity, equity, and inclusion is, or we think we know what it is. And I think it's really interesting because when Dr. McKinnon was talking about those focus areas that came up from kids, almost every single one of those items to me hits across one of those buckets, across like having a safe school, having a place where we're like having opportunities to really understand real world or authentic learning experiences and understanding each other, building climate. All of those kind of touch on this large framework of DEI. And so what would be helpful to understand from a PD perspective? And then we'll talk about this task force kind of separately. Was that better?
You had a question for us, the administration, or for the committee?
For the committee, but if you have an answer, you can jump in. Go ahead,
I
Charlie.
think it'd be helpful, as the strategic plan sort of flushes out, to understand where each school or each building falls in sort of gaps, strengths, or weaknesses, and then the plan to address it. So I think, Stephanie, we were talking about, hey, we're still kind of assessing the need. By December, I would imagine you would have a good understanding of, hey, these are the gaps, these are the strengths and weaknesses of each building, and then how do we address that? I think the other concern I always have with sort of these self-selecting groups is the people that generally volunteer for these types of things aren't necessarily the ones that need it most. So I probably want to know a little bit more about how you're addressing that concern, that self-selecting bias that may be happening from having to be volunteer versus mandatory.
Thank you. Yeah, Jeff.
Yeah, but I'd be interested to know what the level of acceptance is amongst the teachers and the administrators. You can go to all the training in the world, but if you're not buying what the person's selling, it was 45 minutes that you spent, taking notes or reading your emails. So I'd be interested to know how can we measure that?
So for example, if at the end of a day of training, the staff completed some sort of survey about that session, like some sort of data from that, or,
Well, I don't, I think people on a survey, especially if you want their names,
oh no, it'd
which
be,
I would,
yeah,
oh,
no,
no, let's own what you do, please. But is to understand what the level of, how people feel about what we're asking them to do.
Okay.
I mean, so many, I know a whole lot of teachers. I've been doing this for 30 years. I've been doing a great job. I have a great relationship with my kids. They all come back to see me when they're home for Thanksgiving. And I don't need all this. I've got enough to do the job that I'm doing, which is certainly not easy.
Those same people will complain about asbestos training, but doesn't mean we shouldn't do asbestos.
I'm not sure that's on the same road, but I understand what you mean.
so some measure of how teachers are feeling about, our staff are feeling about the opportunities presented to them in mandatory training.
Mhm.
training. Okay, got it.
But how they feel matter as much as if it's effective or not.
Or you could do both, like what does effective mean?
But that's a question.
Well, I think effectiveness is the buy-in, right? Like,
Yes, exactly.
Or what could be improved upon. So to your point, if you don't feel like this was effective for you, or this hasn't made an impact on you, what would you have liked to see introduced or included? What would have made this better to improve upon it in the future? Something of that nature could be included in the surveys.
Right, so I'm hearing some kind of quantitative metric around acceptance, but then potentially a qualitative metric that if you answer below X, what would you do differently? Give us your input so we can continue to better, okay?
But I'd like just to build on what Sharad suggested, right? So if I heard that correctly, that in October, each of the boards will be presented a set of strategic priorities, which if I heard that correctly as well, that this work that the task force is intended to govern will fall under priority 2, if you will, and then perhaps under the concepts and values of being safe and valued, feeling safe and valued, having supporting mental health and social emotional skills, and from a teacher's perspective, having authentic learning. Those to me are all subsets of what this committee could advise or react to on behalf of our constituents, and then the administrators can tell us what's feasible or not. So to that point, if that's the output, right, in October, presumably each of the boards will say, well, this group of students needs that group of students need this, and this is where the gaps are. What I'd like to see, once that's identified, is, well, what does that look like from a timeline perspective? Getting back to Clarissa's comment on, it's 15 teachers. Okay, great, that's awesome. And also addressing Sarad's comment, get rid of the self-selecting bias. And even from, Jeff's comment too, as well as where there might be resistance, right? Any learner, I don't care where you want to learn, if you don't want to learn it, even if you're an adult, you're gonna have a bell curve of learners, right? People are just gonna take a lot more time for whatever reason, and some people are gonna be like, I got it, I'm good. So really putting to a calendar what the gaps are by building. Okay, I got 15 teachers, 5 by district. Now these
these are the gaps, this is how we teach. We're gonna teach this. This is what the plan looks like for PD for the rest of the year. It's probably gonna need money, right? Or it's probably gonna need prioritization. That'll come to then budget and ask, right? And then this is gonna go on and rinse and repeat. And that's a good thing, because it's learning, right? It never stops. So I think if we can get something more concrete along those lines, and I think I've heard a lot of comments about how do we prioritize it with, well, maybe bloodborne pathogens, it's not a good idea, but how do we prioritize that with math? Here's how you prioritize it with math. When Katherine Johnson, I hope I get her name right? Everybody knows that movie, right? The, about the scientist, right? So that's an example. You don't have to have a separate PD to say, hey, Katherine Johnson was a NASA scientist that developed, that helped guys go to the moon. And that's easy, right? That's easy. I think it's easy, but the administrators can tell us no. But that's, to me, it doesn't have to be additive. It's getting back to the culture, right? What looks like culture for me is going to be different than everybody else in this room. And that's okay, right? It doesn't mean that we're learning less or more, or somebody's being prioritized above and beyond. But to have those examples, it's every day. So I think linking that to a prioritized plan, and then if we have X amount of PD sessions by year, by building, what's the minimum, right? So again, going back to Clark's comment, everybody's got basic training, if you will. You're in the military, you have basic training. Everybody has to learn how to do this. You're an accountant. You have to learn how to do a debit and credit. This, to me, should be considered as part of basic training, if you will, right? And what that is going to look like in every building is going to be different, and should be, right? It's going to be different because our community is different. It's going to be different because now we've got more, non-English speakers coming in. And that's okay. And if we have less next year, then we adjust. But I think to actually help it link to a plan and a calendar is very helpful after we've identified the strategic priorities by building.
So what I'm hearing is district-wide strategic plan.
Yep.
Distilling down into school improvement or school prioritization plans. Strengths and opportunities which would be in that plan, and then how does PD fit those needs? And it's specific to each of the schools, and more of a timeline so that it's more clear on kind of how we're meeting those priorities against the school year.
Yeah, and one other thing, what's optional and opt-in versus not.
Okay, so on that kind of plan, what's optional during the school year and over the summer, and what is required for folks, and who, when we say required, who is that staff? Is that right? Which folks?
All 500 teachers, or is it 15?
Okay, gotcha.
Can I just say that there are some things that you talk, four comments there that happened in the span of 5 to 7 minutes. But there's a lot that you just said. And there's a lot of work to go into what you just said. And I can tell you that in our school improvement plans, which is the acronym is a SIP, and a district improvement plan, which is a DIP, we'll talk about that in October. We'll talk about our goals and metrics and standardized achievement and formative assessments and all of that data. And we will identify family engagement goals, and we'll probably identify at least 2 climate goals that will be part of the SIP, okay? And so those will be metrics. And then you mentioned the strategic plan, under which there's a focus area. One way to measure success under that district, under that strategic priority, is to identify a series of action steps, and when those action steps are going to occur and when those action steps are going to be completed. So I buy into everything you just said. Where it gets more difficult is when you assess professional development and whether that professional development is effective or not. Okay, because I think you all made really good points about how you feel about professional development. And there's a researcher named Michael Fullen. He talked about change, and change is very difficult. And depending on where you are in that level of change, you could be at the first level, which is, I deny that this change needs to occur in the first place. And then you move into place blame, then you move into understanding, and eventually move into acceptance. So depending on where you are, it's going to influence your result, whether you think that professional development is needed. If I was going to provide some professional development in some questioning strategies in the classroom, some teachers feel like I'm a great question. I've had this training before. I don't need it. Other teachers are going to say, I really need this training. I've never had this training before. So everyone is in a different place. So it's hard to develop an instrument that captures what you were just talking about, other than the SIP, the DIP, the strategic plan, the action steps, and a timeline for when those action steps take place. And the gaps, strengths, and weaknesses, or the SWOT analysis, I think is one way that you can look at evaluating how good an organization is according to its operations. But it's hard to say, right, this school's doing really well, and this school, you're really weak. So in the science of education and professional development, there's some really good things that you just talked about, and there are some doable things, but there's also some things that we have to think about. I just want to throw it out there.
Right. No, and I would, again, I agree with your caution around assessing PD. I think it's interesting information to hear. I think it's interesting information. I don't think it should be used to make decisions in the sense that it's like, well, 10 people didn't like it, so we should never do it. 10 people may not like your questioning strategy, but from Hattie's research that it is the right thing to do, and that's the best for kids. So like, I think it's information that helps inform where we are on the continuum of change that might help say, hey, we started here, but really we needed to start here. Or we started here, but really our teachers are way over here and they need a deeper, they have opportunities for deeper learning. But I would like to piggyback on what Cheryl said. I think there's this sometimes misconception that you're either doing DEI training or you're doing math training, and that's not true, right? Like there's lots of, when we talk about any kind of content area, there's lots of opportunities for teachers to think about how they relate to students and how their culture brings them into the classroom. Like if you've gone to I grew up in a home where it was like, I was convinced I just couldn't do math, right? So I'm coming into like math PD for somebody who never thought they could do math. Like that's a cultural piece that the teachers need to overcome, and learning how to work on a growth mindset and build community with certain groups of students who think they struggle in math could be a DEI topic, but also could be covered in a training to support math instruction, right? So like, I don't think they're always as separate and finite as they are being presented
Right.
potentially.
Yeah, you can embed a lot of this instruction across all curriculums.
Right. Sorry, Chris.
So I agree entirely. And I think one of the risks of sort of this group being the DEI group is that it gives credence to this idea that you're either doing DEI or you're not doing DEI.
Yeah.
And if we go back a year and a half, 2 years ago, whatever it was, I recall at least one of these meetings where we talked about how really diversity, equity, inclusion touches upon all the work that we're doing across all of the spheres of a school. And that we kept to avoid getting into these sort of ruts and use this group as a way to look at everything the district is doing and the districts are doing through that lens. And I think something that might be productive for December is when Dr. McKinnon by then will have presented his dips and his sips to 3 boards as well as the tri-board, to take those plans and look at them through that lens in this group. Because we can look at things from facilities, from an access and equity perspective, the same way we can look at curriculum, professional development, and everything else. My guess is that every one of those buckets and every one of those action steps can be viewed through this lens without saying, dear administration, please give me another 3 reports. It's let's talk about it in the context of the strategic work you're already doing. So that we can identify how it all works together. And that when we see in budgets, here's the consultant that's going to help us with X, Y, Z. We understand that it's not the DEI work. It's the work that helps the district advance, and advancing has to take with it improvements in that area.
Yeah, right. And I 100% agree. And you said it way better, but I was hoping that you wouldn't, like both Dr. Kristen Uval and Dr. McKinnon wouldn't be doing a DEI report, but instead, when we look at how those different pieces of the strategic plan align, and we think about the improvement across the district and the schools, that's a natural conversation within those metrics, within those documents, that we have across a range of areas. And I think even when we look at PD, it shouldn't just be the PD that, it's like, what's Jose doing? Well, that's like, again, PD hits DEI all the time. It's just a natural part of being an educator when you think of teaching, right?
And sometimes as leaders, we have to make decisions for the people that.
Yeah.
I just think about the work that I do as a parent, around this work. Sometimes I have to command that my children do things or go to see different things or explore different, experiences, because I'm their leader. And I think that's something that we need to think about as if we're charged to lead this work. Some of it, there's room for democracy, but sometimes there isn't.
So additional comments or thoughts around staff opportunities for learning or like strategic prioritization as we think about the December meeting? Mike, sorry, you're smiling.
No, I mean, everyone's speaking so intelligently and I get all that. I'm still coming back to whether everyone gets trained. And I understand some will buy in, some won't buy in. I get all that, but education is kind of that way, right? We have to teach algebra, and some will learn, some won't learn, but at least everyone's been exposed to the algebra, right? But what I'm struggling with here is it seems like we're going to embed it in everything. We're going to use it in our SIP and our DIP and our whatever else we want to call it. But in the end, no one has explained to me how it goes from 15 teachers to everybody.
What's the it, Mike? Thinking about it in a very analog way.
The training.
What the training?
Well, there's philosophy and there's teaching opportunities and philosophy in the training that this consultant we're paying for is providing, right? How does that get communicated to the entire staff?
So are you specifically talking about the culturally responsive teaching in the brain training that Dr. Kirsten-Newbold talked about in the beginning around culture?
That's part of it. Everything that we're paying a lot of money to consultants for this educational enlightenment, and how is that being transferred to the staff?
So,
And where's the impact on the kids?
And well, and that all kind of follows suit, and everything that everyone's saying makes sense, and it all ties into that as well. But I'm just struggling with the concrete end of it. What is the plan? Because we're like, well, this is in part of that plan, and this is part of that plan, but it's really not starting with
So-
a plan.
Mike, I can
The
tell you, let me give you
23-24.
some,
That all the teachers and administrators will be trained by 23-24.
So
Is that realistic? I don't know.
so let me just give some examples. So it could be that in one building, there is a staff meeting that's an hour long.
Mhm.
And a principal says, this would be a great opportunity to bring in the consultant, the whole staff, people are engaged, they'll be present. It will be a good start for the whole staff. In another building, they might say, our staff meeting is 25 minutes, but that's not the right way to do it. Let's talk about how you're really, because you're talking about adult learners. So you have to be sure your adult learners are engaged. So that's what I'm talking about, a different plan. I don't mean some people will get it and some people won't. I mean, it might take a different form. So in another building, it might be, we do department meetings. You'll get a group of people. You'll have a good chunk of time. They're going to be more fully engaged. They're going to have time to ask questions. It's a smaller group, but it's going to take 2 sessions or it's going to take 3 sessions. So that's what I'm trying to develop that is more personalized, as opposed to me saying, here's the calendar. Everyone has to do it in your September, your October, your faculty meeting, so I can check it off the list. Which, if we're talking about learning and having people really hold on to the learning, then I don't think that's the right way to go about it.
I think
So
we
it's
can,
not a yes or
No,
no.
and I accept that. I'm just saying, if it was in new science standards, How would we do that?
That's
Would
more.
we do it the same
But that's
way?
more concrete, right? What we're saying is, hey,
course
look,
it is.
what we're talking about is changing a culture, which is a much more holistic, like, thing to change. It's not a concrete thing where you can just say, hey, you took this class, you're now culturally aware, and you're gonna be an awesome teacher. Like, it's gonna be a thing where they have to blend it into all these other aspects of how teachers operate. Some are gonna be really good at it, some are gonna be really crappy at it, and then the good ones are gonna have to help you know what I mean?
That's
It's-
a given. I'm just saying, how does everyone get exposed?
How about
It's
we,
not clear.
we provide you with a framework, what that looks like at the December meeting? That would be an agenda item.
So, yeah, okay, great. I was gonna ask if, as you think about the student improvement plan, and you think about kind of what does it look like when you funnel out from a small group of teachers that we had over the summer to the larger staff over the school year? What could that look like?
Okay.
And it might look a little bit different in different schools, but like
Yeah.
an idea, so lovely.
Devin, you had asked what does success look like at the very beginning of your question. And so I think, Mike, am I understanding correctly that success for you would mean all the teachers get trained in this?
Yeah, well, I'd start with say all teachers are exposed to this, right? So yes, and hopefully that does, to Chirag's point, it will change the culture and that should get embedded in what we do. I guess where I'm, like I said, what I'm still unclear on is how it spreads from 15 to everybody. That's what and whether, you know, what gets lost in translation through to, you know, this school did it, but they did it differently than that school, and how to, because we're always talking about, you know, vertical articulation and everyone's doing so that we're all kind of on the same page. And I just want to make sure that that's what we're doing here, is that I'm trying to understand the plan, that that's what we're doing.
So I
here.
think so my understanding, so on the December meeting, when we plan this meeting on the agenda, we will have a topic around strategic priorities. And then how does that, so the strategic plan that Dr. McKinnon has spoken about, focusing on item number 2, right, really, but, you know, and then looking at dips and sips, my 2 favorite things. And then within that, I think a framework for how the PD goes from the smaller group of teachers who voluntarily took it over the summer to the larger staff population over the course of the school year.
Okay.
And I know, I understand your concern is, you want to have a little bit more understanding of how we are prioritizing this for our staff. And like making sure that folks have access to and exposure to these concepts. Gotcha, thank you.
Okay, we're on it.
On it, thank you. So part of this focus area is learning opportunities for our task force. Dr. Kristen Uval and I talked about in our December meeting, in addition to the agenda item that we just mentioned, having Jose, who did the training and will be working with our school leaders, administrators through the course of the school year, coming in and also doing some work with this task force. One is, I've heard from many members that they would really welcome some learning opportunities, but also like, what are people learning? It might be nice to kind of have some insight. So one is that something, if we add that to the agenda in our December meeting, that folks would welcome.
Is it something that should be as a separate meeting though?
You can't. A separate meeting, I mean, you could just make an additional meeting of this same group, a special meeting. Or are you talking more, should it be a session that's not a meeting?
I'm just wondering about time.
Okay, so I didn't know if it was a
Yeah.
time or a
There's
participation.
there's an aspect of like trust and openness during these things, right? And so I don't know necessarily if everybody would be, I would be fine with it, but if everyone would be comfortable doing it in a broadcast setting, like, are you gonna get the same, you know, outcome from the group as you would in a private setting?
No.
Right, but that would be my guess.
Well, actually, I think, we just had a conversation earlier. I think doing this work, we have to push ourselves to be uncomfortable. And not rely so much on what people think. I think if we're doing this work in an authentic way, we should not be afraid to speak our truth. Whatever that truth is, we need to be able to speak it, regardless of who's in front of us. Because we need to start having honest conversations around this issue and not be afraid to, we don't need to scan the room. We shouldn't have to scan the room. Let's just say what our heart feels, and if this is in the interest of making things better, of improving the lives of our children, improving our world, then let's talk about it.
So I agree with you, and I think that, like, I would be comfortable with that, and I know, but I don't know if necessarily everyone would say, yes, I can be bold, brave enough to speak my truth in a public setting, like, I don't.
And that's where we need to bring ourselves to that place.
Well, I think sometimes you might be talking about like family members or that don't necessarily have consent about in a public forum.
And people's level of comfort can be different, even if it's just among this group versus amongst this group recorded for time of memorial on the internet. I think there's various levels of comfort that people have, sort of exposing their own vulnerabilities.
I think that's a really important thing to discuss. I will say that, having participated in the 2 days in August, that the style of the facilitator is not one at all to compel people to participate. So there are plenty of people that could sit comfortably and simply listen and not either pass when given an opportunity to speak or just not participate. I don't think it didn't happen at all, but I think it's the point you're making, Jennifer, or just the fact that it would be memorialized.
So there's a couple options. One is we could have Jose come and do more of an overview of the type of work that he is doing in the buildings, answer questions, kind of do an explainer more of the type of work and maybe do a little bit of thinking exercises with folks. And then potentially there might be something that is not a formal, it's more of an optional opportunity. I don't know what exactly that looks like, so I don't know the rules around it. Chris Parkin knows all the law. And we could think about something else that is people can participate, but it's not, recorded over YouTube. Personally, I'm pretty open to speaking my truth on YouTube. It doesn't bother me, but I also don't want anybody to feel uncomfortable. So
I think it would be great for not just us, for the community to learn what the training is. So having an explainer with questions would be great. And then also doing an optional session where it might be more facilitated for us as a group to learn what really good looks like.
And I would add that I think that it would be wonderful for us to open it up to the community, because as we are learning and exploring through this process, people might want to come along for the journey with us and may even decide that they want to be a part of this group and the work moving forward. So.
okay, so I'm hearing definitely at least an explainer. How about for the other parts, one is like, let me understand the rules because I don't know them. And two, I can ask offline people's comfort level, so we don't put anybody on the spot here. If folks, how comfortable folks are with some sort of activity led by Jose.
It feels like there's a pretty heavy agenda for December, just from what we talked about in the past 20 minutes, between reviewing the dips and sips and priorities and just an overview of what the training is. That at that point, we'll be in a position to talk about whether we're scheduling other meetings for the purpose of hands-on.
Fair. Great. Okay, number two. Communication. So this is another piece that has come up in multiple meetings. We really memorialized it as a focus area during our June 6th conversation. Communication processes, website tools, and climate data. So before we go into this, Dr. Pierce-Newgall and Dr. McKinnon, I think if you can just share with some of the ideas you have around transparency in the website and climate data and things like that, I think for the team here to understand some of the things you're already thinking, so that when we think about this as a focus area, there's some understanding of some of the important work and thinking your teams have already done.
Well, sure. Quite simply, I've only been here for 12 months, and we had 4 DEI meetings last year, maybe. approximately, something like that. And I just think that 90% of our time, we focused on data, surveys, statisticians. I personally felt like we spent too much time on data and not enough time on talking about what we're actually going to do with the data. So I proposed a simple, let's spend 10% of our time on the data. Let's spend 40% of our time on defining what professional development training looks like. Let's spend another 50% of that time talking about kind of some experiences we want our students to learn in classrooms, okay? And so what we were talking about last week was the idea of, let's just take all the data, put it in tables, put it on the website and say, here it is, here's the data, take a look at it. And in terms of the SIPs and the DIPs we mentioned before, we will identify some focus areas that we believe are important that our schools are going to focus on. So that was really the idea, that kind of the conversation. Let's give everyone the data. Everyone can look at the data at their leisure. And we will pick 2 focus areas in terms of family engagement, a couple of focus areas in terms of climate, and we will focus on action steps related to those areas. That way we're spending less time on data and more time on action. And everyone can get to see that. And if someone wants to ask a question, they can send a question to us, we'll answer it.
Great. And also in the October meetings, I believe there will be, in the board meetings, not this meeting, but some conversation around climate data that will be published on our website. So we have more transparency into the data, focus areas, and then from that, action steps. Again, with the DEI focus, similar to what Mr. Parkin was talking about earlier, when we see those dips and steps, we can really bring that lens to that conversation and think about that in terms of next steps and focus. Other things around this communication has come up a lot and I think these conversations, especially over the last, in our April meeting and then in June. So I think a couple other pieces that came up around communication. Who do I reach as a parent? Who do I reach out to with a question? And just making that more clear to families so that if they have a question about curriculum, obviously the curriculum frameworks are posted, but also you can ask your teacher. And just, I know Dr. McKinnon last year around this time published like right after you got here, communication chain of who do you reach out to with what questions? So making that more clear so families across the district, caregivers across the district really know who to reach out to with different questions and who to go to if they have a concern about different topics.
We can send that out again,
That would be lovely.
please. It basically points to Chris Parker.
But Chris for everything. I think the other piece that has come up is, and that this may be fixed already, so, and I'll just throw it out there, is the climate, who do I contact? Like, what does the climate committee do? Who do I contact on the committee? Who are, we have our climate coordinator here, so who, like, making sure that's clear, and that may be on the website that you guys are going to publish with the data. But the idea of when I have a question about something that has happened in a school, who can I go to on the Safe School Committee or the Climate Committee to ask a question or find out more data information, just more transparency. It's kind of buried a little on the website.
Yeah, I think that'll be an easy thing to fix. I'm looking at Michael. So we actually just updated the reporting form. But I think we could include just a short narrative to go with it. So it's really clear who the contact people are.
Maybe a trimester reminder might be helpful. I like that.
Send it out with the report cards. Like, seriously. Or send whatever reminders out with the parent, because the parents will look at that.
Brock, I'm sorry, did you hear something?
I didn't hear what you said, but I get up.
Yeah.
And then I know another thing that has come up is we do have more families and caregivers across the district who English is not their primary language. And so ensuring that there are ways for families to translate.
Yeah, we've actually given a lot of attention to that topic that started last year, but also this year to be sure that when we're publishing things, they're not in a form that's an image so that they can be translated. We've actually changed a number of letters that we produce on an annual basis so that that is possible.
What about the website? Is the website able to be translated?
It is, but not entirely. So there are still many links that go to images as opposed to documents that can be translated from images. Can't be. So we
Yeah.
are working on that. So let's use the policies as an example.
Yeah.
For a long time, some policies could be translated and others couldn't, depending on how they were linked. And that will all be improved. We have the policy links updated, but we're looking at a more major reform of our website. So rather than going sort of backwards to try and fix things, which would be enormously time consuming, as you know, with a small central office staff, I think we're looking at how we evolve the website in a manner that will make it more forward thinking in that regard.
We spent a lot of time last week taking the policies from PDFs and Word documents, putting them into Google. And so parents can use Google Translate. Yeah. So,
Additional thoughts about communication processes, website tools, and data. Awesome. And then the final focus area, family engagement. And so I think in our last meeting, we learned, from a couple community members around, some of the special opportunities around holidays or special events in school assemblies and things like that, and thinking around how we engage families in a culturally responsive and inclusive way. And if you remember, I think there was an example given. And so just really trying to think through how we communicate with families about those unique days, and then also working with educators, teachers, as they plan those opportunities, how they think about all of the different students and their backgrounds and experiences and cultures. I think one project that has been used as an example in this task force many times is an immigration project, and how, while the intent of that project is obviously very positive, not every student can equitably participate, or participating in that project would be really triggering for them. So being thoughtful about different ways that we engage families and projects and different cultural opportunities, making sure that we think about all the kids' backgrounds and experiences, so that we are thoughtful and sensitive to those differences in the rooms. So any thoughts around family engagement? And this will definitely come up again, I think, as we come into that December conversation.
So I don't know if every school's PTA has an inclusion committee. I know RES's PTA does, because I'm on it. But that is a great way to actually directly interact with the parents at each school and sort of build programs around similar goals. And so, RES, and then there's a budget that the PTA provides for the committees to do activities in the assemblies. So that my suggestion would be, each person or, engage with the PTA at each school.
Yeah, it's a great idea. Thank you. Great. Other thoughts, questions? Okay, next step. So for our December meeting, we've identified no work for the central office because they're already doing the work and they're going to use that work and come to us with that. You're welcome. It's gonna be fun. We are also we'll talk through the time that Jose spends with us. We're going to focus more on the explainer. And then I will figure out like any other optional opportunities with community involvement that we could potentially plan in addition to the December meeting. And I think, and then October, if you are on this committee and would like to come to some of the Board of Ed meetings, it sounds like the central office and our amazing staff will be doing some conversations around climate data, and that website will be becoming live. Did I miss anything? Awesome. Okay. Public comment. If you have a comment, I would ask that you stand up, state your name, street and town. Please keep your comments to 3 minutes or less, and you can make your comments relevant to the conversations that we've had this evening. Great. Oh, sorry, sir.
I'm Roger Lancaster. I'm new to town here, so I really came here to listen. Really, so kind of I've got a couple questions.
Can you really quick street name and town?
Sorry,
You got your street name and town?
132 Topstone.
Okay.
In Reading.
Thank you.
Are the slides available online?
We can absolutely make them available.
I think it'd be a good thing.
Sure.
Secondly, I'm retired now. I spent most of my life as a business consultant. You're talking about professional development, and you said a couple of years ago we had something that wasn't so good. You have goals you're striving for. As a business consultant, the first things we do is set up metrics. You gotta have data, you gotta measure it. If you can't measure it and see that you're doing something, and it's just an exercise in talking. Do you have key performance indicators set up? That's one question.
So yeah, during public comment, it's not a,
You can make the comment and they don't respond now, they take it in and.
sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, and let me just say, I suggest you do.
Thank you. Yes,
Carolyn Oppenheim, Huntington Road in Easton. First of all, thank everybody for doing this work. It is hard work because it is reaching out to very few. Because I think that a majority of students feel included and feel part of things and feel that they're having an experience like most of their peers. So for those that don't, for one reason or another, whether they are of a minority with their race, if they're a minority because of their sexual orientation, if they're a minority because of their gender identity, if they're a minority because of their disabilities. And we get a lot of those in my household, but I appreciate that we're looking at it, and I think that it's important, I think, for members to remember that we're trying to reach all the children. It's a lot of them are feeling included, and it's those that don't, that are going to struggle and have problems and have mental health, and I mean, the mental health, but recognizing that I want to recognize that I know it's the few that you're reaching for, but to get those few in so that we don't have the tragedies that other districts have had. It's vital work, making sure that everybody feels they're a part of things in some way, not in everything, they can't, nobody can, but in some way, is very vital work. So thank you.
additional public comment. Great, committee member comment.
I'd say great agenda, nicely run, and it's only 8:51, so very good. And I look forward to kind of along the lines of timeline, action steps, KPIs, so fully exactly that.
I'll jump in. I just wanted to say thank you. We generally can't respond right away to your comments, but we can respond during this time period. So I just wanted to say thank you for sharing your feedback with us. I look forward to hearing our various KPIs that we do have. I'm still fairly new, so I couldn't tell you what they are. But and thank you, Carolyn, as well for your feedback too. I tend to agree. I think there's a large body of our student population who does feel like they belong. And it is definitely on my mind that we have students that don't feel like they belong at our schools, that are struggling, that may or may not be in and out of mental health issues at different times, or just having, like we said, learning disabilities. And I don't think any of us here, from what I've encountered so far, want someone to fall through the cracks. I think everyone is here for the right reasons and really has the student's best interest in mind. And so I think we just have to keep moving forward, and that's what we intend to do. And we look forward to other people coming from the community and joining our efforts to do that, so we can continue to make an impact in a meaningful way, so that way more and more students can feel like they belong and they're heard.
I also think, though, that ensuring there's an environment where students are learning about things outside of their immediate experience is really important for their development going out into the world. So if this work is not just for the kids that may not feel included, but it actually can benefit all of the kids.
Additional committee member comment? I just want to say thank you to the committee, because I feel like I know that for the past couple of years, as we've done this work, it's felt at times stalled. We haven't necessarily set clear goals or, work together to really think about how across the priorities of the district, how do we have this lens of what benefits all of our kids, and making sure that we don't leave any kids out to fall through cracks. And I'm just excited and thankful to have partners in this work as we think about how do we move forward with the vision of supporting every single student in our school communities, and doing so in a way that it's part of the work that we are doing and not a tack on to the work, but also then asking what's working, what isn't, and with a lens of consistently working to improve for the betterment of all of our kids.
Devin?
Yes.
I recognize that I'm new and this is my first meeting, but I am curious what the thinking was to make it just available on YouTube and not a Zoom meeting, so that the general public can chime in.
We haven't done a Zoom meeting in, I don't know the last time we did a Zoom meeting in this task force.
No, I'm just saying that,
Yeah,
we went through a period of a lot of Zoom, and we certainly had a lot of public involvement. Some of it was more exciting than others, but I'm just curious as to why we're not doing that here.
so I think from my knowledge, all of the board meetings that are back in person have been done via YouTube, so folks can definitely join in. We'd love to have the public comment and interact with us in this space, and then also, of course, via email. So I don't think there's any other reason than that is how we're running other board meetings and how we run this task force meeting since we came back in person. So definitely not wanting to exclude anybody. I'm always available, as people know, via email for additional feedback and conversation.
Okay.
I think.
I can't recall a single committee meeting in the pre-COVID era that was ever broadcast or recorded in any way. So I think this is already a monumental step forward that we're using this technology in as many spaces as we are, including these committee meetings and other committee meetings.
I was gonna ask, can the public send in a comment, or like to email it to you so that it can be presented as a public comment during the meeting, or no?
We normally don't read public comment during the meetings. It could get quite lengthy. I think everything becomes part of the public record. So folks can obviously access the public record if they so choose. We don't want to accidentally leave, if somebody sends it 5 minutes before and we miss it, right, it just gets a little hairy. But fair question.
I also think that this one begs for personal contact. And when we were on Zoom, I didn't like it at all. I think there's a lot that has an effect on people when you can make eye contact, or, the body mannerisms, and, just being able to talk to someone directly. And I think we should encourage people to come out, because this work is so important. It needs to be a community conversation. And I think the more we can invite people in, I think we'll have better luck and do much more effective work. Zoom meetings, for me, even at work, I try to stay away from them.
I think a lot of people have become very comfortable to participating or paying attention to public meetings in the comfort of their own home, in their
Yeah.
pajamas, at whatever time of
Yeah,
day.
yeah,
I've noticed in our meetings, conventionally, we probably had Mike and 5 or 6 other people at running meetings on a regular basis, and now it might be 1 or 2 people, but I hear from those people who are regulars on a regular basis saying, I was watching you, I was watching you, I was watching you. So I agree that it's helpful to have people physically in person, but the nature of it is that in the world of Zoom meetings, people have gotten very comfortable, they're not having to drive anymore.
Additional committee member comment?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?